What's up, freedom lovers? The next video in the series on incorporation is coming next week, but I want to do this quick little video here on two Roman maxims of law, which are divide and rule and bread and circuses. Essentially, these are important because when you're formulating a legal argument, you need to have some sort of point of reference to be like, this is why I'm invoking my rights, because there's this influence out here in the ether, if you will, and it's exerting force on me, and I want it to stop. And so you have to be able to articulate that. You can't just go to court and be like, oh no, this person's being mean to me. It doesn't always work, right? You never go to court unless you're basically assured a victory. So if you think that there's a high probability or even a moderate probability that you could fail, don't go at all, because that could potentially seriously make it bad. If you have to go because you've been summoned, that's different. But if you're initiating, don't ever go there unless you're absolutely 100% sure that it's a slam dunk. I mean, you have them dead to rights on multiple levels. Then you go to court and it's all good, because they're still going to push back on you. And that's why you need to have everything lined up, because they'll be way less likely to want to mess with you if you've got a really solid case, because they don't want to become liable themselves. But of course, just starting here with divide and rule, I guess you could say you can see this. It was true during the times of the Romans, and then all throughout history from them, the 2,000 years, you keep seeing the participants, if you will, the two combatants changing places. So it's the French and the English, and it's the German and the Russians, and it's this and it's that, and whatever else it is. It's the rich and the poor. It's white versus black. It's Democrat versus Republican. These sort of meaningless squabbles accomplish nothing and only serve to entrench an irrational hatred for another group of people that are essentially, you're both fighting for the same thing, the freedom to express yourself in your own way. And you would normally have the right to do that within reason, of course. There is no sort of real world scenario where we can just be like, oh yeah, no, throw the floodgates wide open and let people go crazy. No, that's a bad idea. So you have to have some guide rails, but for the most part, they're like guidelines, not really rails. Just kind of be like, all right, stay in the gray area kind of deal. So they have these systems in place, because at the end of the day, what does divide and rule really do? It allows a very, very small advantaged group of people to control a very large group of other people and profit. Crassus, one of the richest men in Rome, was one of the few guys to actually have a fire brigade. And when your house caught fire, he'd show up and he'd be like, sell me your house and I'll put out the fire. And then he would lease your house or your business back to you, and you would pay him rent. Okay? So there it is. It goes back 2,000 years. Effectively, they're like, if you don't do X, I'll do Y. Right? And then they just frame that question over and over and over again by pitting two groups of people against each other. Well, if the white peoples aren't more inclusive, then we're being discriminatory to the black people. Which may be true or may not be true depending on very specific circumstances, but overall it's just an absolute sort of BS argument that's used to basically keep stupid, moronic people in check. That's all I will say on the matter. But you see what I'm saying? During the Second World War, after like all of the European monarchies essentially witnessed in the First World War, essentially the Russians get slaughtered there during the Russian Revolution, it just put the fear of God into them. Too many people was the first thing. There are too many people for us to be able to control. So what's the first thing they did? Was facilitate the wars. which wiped out about 50 or 60 million people. And what did we get for it? There's the world's not more peaceful. I mean, we did go through a period there, but that's just because there were so few people. It took a while for us to get up ahead of steam again, right? But after you did that little trick, and they just did it again, right? Something like 25 million excess deaths worldwide now attributed to the whole COVID-19 thing. So, I mean, nobody's even talking about COVID-19. We haven't even talked about it as a serious threat in about 2 years. But back in 2020, it was like all the rage, right? Like they just amped up the panic like you wouldn't believe. Again, look at what they did during that time. The vaccinated and the compliant against the unvaccinated and the recalcitrant. And then they love to further subdivide it. Look at what they're doing right now. And it's always the same. The atheists against the religious, the heterosexuals versus the whatever more adventuresome ones. I don't care. You see what I'm saying? This component is baked into the cake. And it's baked into the cake because it's one of the most useful techniques that this small group of people have to keep you bickering and arguing and hating on this person rather than educating yourself about how to free yourself from the system that they've created to protect their wealth, their power, and their privilege. If you go to the Constitution Act 1867 and you go to the Constitution Act of 1901, both in Canada and Australia respectively, you'll see that essentially some politicians in 1867 and again in 1901 took some letters patent to England and basically gave the entire landmass of Canada and Australia to the Queen in perpetuity. And so this landmass is, and the presumptive sort of ownership of it is what gives them the ability to create these laws and extract resources from the population, which goes directly into the royal coffers. So if I'm allowed to be free from servitude and I have the right to freely and fully use my own wealth, and I can determine my own path politically, socially, and in terms of legal matters, well, why didn't we abolish the Constitution Act 1867? Because effectively that creates the very legal document that allows me to be enslaved as a citizen. And that's all a citizen is a corporate slave under the power of the state, granted duties, obligations, and privileges. But those privileges can be limited and taken away at any point in time with almost no justification or no real justification. They could just make up whatever excuse they want, and they did. You saw that if you read any of the court cases from back in the Freedom Convoy days with respect to these people trying to enforce their rights under the Constitution. Of course, they all got lawyers, and they all applied under Section 2, which can be limited by Section 1, and almost all of them lost. Like 99% of them. 99. They're so psychotic up here that even though we have the right to attain the highest physical and mental health, as well as having absolute rights to medical attention at whenever we want or need it, the Canadian Supreme Court allowed people to die because they wouldn't get the C-19 shot. Like they were unvaxxed. And then, of course, when they got sick and they needed an operation, the hospital was like, you need to be vaxxed. And then they sued on constitutional grounds. I didn't actually read the lawsuits because they both died before it even got to court. But on the preliminary stuff, the Supreme Court said, nah, we're not going to hear the case. So, yeah, just in case you were wondering. And of course, this is it. Who pays the salaries of the judges? Right? Who provides them all the perks, the recommendations and everything else that they get? And of course, they're living very high on the hog. So, of course, they're going to defend the government's interests. You're going to have to force these people with logic and law and their own system, which they've expertly obfuscated for decades and made it 10 times worse by creating tens of thousands of pages of legislation that just muddies up the water. Just gets you going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole. Again, all in the service of divide and rule. Oh, I hate the court system. Divide and rule means so much more than what people actually think. Oh, I hate the court system. It's so boring and it's silly and they have their own thing going on and I can barely understand anything and blah, blah, blah and all the rest of it. And you just start complaining and it just makes you sick to your stomach to actually think that you would have to deal with this. But it is the very mechanism that they use to essentially either destroy your life or put the boot right on your neck. And yet people are like, nah, I don't want to do it. You know what I mean? They'll literally starve and accept to be fleeced on a carbon tax or something like that. That's going to go up to like 20%. We're complaining about 25% tariffs from the United States, but the carbon tax is going up to another 20% in April. So we've already hate the carbon tax to the point where politicians are like, oh yeah, no, it's not working. And the population's getting very angry. And that's going up by another 20% in April, and nobody was actually protesting that. And then when Donald Trump was like, yo, you got to basically secure the border and stuff like that and whatever. I respect the United States for being like, listen, we don't want this. We should have been like, okay, that's a fair request, right? Since we're supposed to be neighborly and everything like that. This whole trade war, which of course benefits no one, but the moneyed interests that basically want to keep us attacking each other. And of course, look what they did. Now it's Canada versus the United States versus Mexico, Canada versus Mexico, Canada versus India. I remember when I was a kid, I had a paper route in the 80s, and a lot of Indian people moved in the 80s to Canada. And for the most part, they're pretty nice people. Nobody wanted to go to their house to collect money for obvious reasons. But you know what? Their money was as green as anybody else's. So it was okay. But as you can see, the situations changed significantly. We used to have really good relations with India, and now we're basically fighting at each other's throats. Again, this really manufactured and contrived narrative that all of a sudden we hate each other or something like that as we continue to do business or whatever else it is. Oh yeah, we'll keep sending products there. We'll slap a tariff on it. Blah, blah, blah. It's just stupid. It's just another meaningless point for people to argue over, right? Or make something like taxes or navigating the court system so unpalatable that, again, they defeat you before you even start. So that is really the nature of the first one, is this divide and rule. You have a very small group of people at the top that will do anything, whatever is necessary, including the most heinous stuff you've ever seen in your life, to keep control. And so they are the absolute masters of spinning these social issues down and getting all the plebs, fired up into a tizzy and just let them go after each other. And they keep doing it again and again and again. You have professional agitators on the internet that basically just stir the pot. I saw about 20 of them this morning on the Twitters. It was pretty funny, actually, We're talking somebody makes a one-sentence inflammatory statement, and of course there's 60,000 comments on it, and 2 million impressions and 400,000 likes. It was nuts. And you just go through it and it's just people lobbing insults back and forth as if anything is going to change. So bottom line is that the stuff that they were doing 2,000 years ago to control the population is the exact same sort of strategy that they're using right now. And it's used for the exact same reason. To keep the rich and in power and in their positions of prestige, and to keep you down. But the difference is now we have the tools to extricate ourselves from that paradigm, and we don't have to play by their rules anymore. After thousands of years, we finally have the tools to basically put these people in their place and get paid at the same time. I mean, you're getting into a situation where it's like people don't want to. They don't want to be free. That's how strong the cognitive dissonances or whatever, the Stockholm syndrome. They love their enslavement. They absolutely love it. And of course, a secondary component to the whole divide and rule has to be bread and circuses, right? Which is essentially just, I'll give you free stuff and I'll entertain you. Just don't pay attention to what I'm doing over here and let me just have free reign, right? Basically, pacify the mind, remove all critical thinking skills, and just consume. That's bread and circuses in 2025. Consume, okay? And don't be critical. Don't think critically. Don't think. Don't read headlines. Don't believe your lying eyes. All of it. And they have this insane apparatus. You've got OnlyFans. You have the whatever multitude of porn sites. You have countless streaming services. You have movies, music. You have the kind of whatever TikTok nonsense that goes on, right? Like TikTok has to be the full embodiment of this idea, where you can see that what goes on there is really just someone holding up a mirror and showing us a sort of a facsimile, if you will, of what our society actually looks like. There was a black woman that went to Pakistan or something like that for an arranged marriage or whatever, and the guy rejected her. Anyways, she just started making this big brouhaha over there, and it was embarrassing as hell. But there it is, man. You're going to go to Pakistan and then make the claim that you have to give her $100,000 and pay her $2,000 a week or whatever it is? Like, do you know where you are, man? Dude, I wouldn't be surprised if they dragged you outside and basically stoned you to death. Like, what is the matter with you, bro? Wow. Anyways, the truth is they have, I mean, let's face it, the circuses thing isn't working quite as good anymore. Notice that? Once they effectively diluted it to the point where it's just, it's meaningless. Music is not what it used to be anymore. It's just mindless drivel when you get into the pop stuff, and especially what went on in the Grammys. Did you know, like, in my day, it was like, you know, if you had too risque a dress or something like that. I remember J-Lo wore this one where they like taped the fabric to her boobies and stuff. And that was in the 90s, I guess. And now fast forward to 2025, where Yee's old lady basically just whips off the fur coat and just stands there naked. If you have to resort to that to get people to pay attention to, you know, an award show, and then, of course, you saw the kind of clown world stuff that these people were saying. I mean, I think the most prevalent clip was the Lady Gaga one, where it was just like, boy, you guys just didn't get the message, right? Like, listen, you can think what you want to think, but I think an overwhelming number of the American population, if you will, is just done with that weird ideology and stuff like that in your thought process. So to continue to keep going on like that doesn't actually make a lot of sense to me, but whatever, you do you kind of thing. Yeah, the apparatus that they have is not effectual anymore. So guess what? You know what that means, right? And it happened too. This is the whole thing that's happening in North America right now happened in Germany too, right before the Great War. Their society was becoming very degenerate. Let's put it that way. Right. And then, of course, there was a bit of a religious revival and all the rest of that stuff. And they kicked out a bunch of bad influences. And just shortly after that, when the degeneracy was removed and they started to fix up some problems and stuff like that, then things started to take off. And then, of course, once things got too good, the war happened. But realistically speaking, I mean, I'm still of the firm opinion that you had the situation in the Second World War the way it is because after what went down in the Russian Revolution with the Romanov family getting absolutely tarnished, they just got wrecked. I think that sent a lightning bolt through all of the powerful interests in Europe, and that was a huge wake-up call. And of course, you had the First World War, which thinned out the population and put the punitive measures on one particular country. And of course, that country was able then to be built up by outside influences. And those outside influences, if you will, basically shaped their destiny. And once they got in the prime position, it was probably the first time in the history of the world when rich people had enough money to effectively hijack a whole country and then make it do terrible things in the name of capitalism, where they were just going to spark off a conflict and profit from it because they'd been doing that for quite some time before it, going back hundreds of years. Obviously, the most famous one being the Waterloo, when you know, the whole Rothschild story about how he cornered the market because he lied about whatever, Wellington winning the war or losing the war, whatever it was, the lie was, I can't remember. But everybody just sold their stocks and he bought them up for pennies on the dollar. And then when it came in that the news was the exact opposite, there it is. He was instantly the richest man in the world. And not much has changed since then. What was that, late 1700s? Right. So, I mean, the Rothschilds are still the de facto moneyed powers in the entire world, worth something like $500 trillion. Some estimates, whether you believe that stuff or not, doesn't matter. But they are definitely fabulously wealthy, and they clearly have supremacy over the societies that we've created, because without their money, the system doesn't function anymore. And we've become so dependent on it that we can't just wean ourselves off the teat. Right? That's basically it. So the bread and circuses thing is essential to keep people, you know, medicated, if you will. And notice, you know, as soon as people were like, you know, drinking alcohol and all the rest of that stuff was causing problems, you know, because people weren't drinking responsibly and whatnot. And then just, you know, was a drunken lout here and there. It was just starting to turn the population into a bunch of animals. Started going crazy. So that's when they would say, so it was like, okay, well, we'll loosen the laws now for the mean green. Because it was the next iteration. It's just like they went from oxycodone to whatever, you know, the next one, OxyContin, and how they took other sort of barbiturates and basically went from it. Like fentanyl is 100 times more powerful than whatever came before it. So, you know what I mean? It's just that arms race basically ramping up the whole time. So long story short is that every time you see these things like an opiate for the masses or a loosening of the rules or whatever else it is and stuff like that, just try to look and see what's going on behind the curtain and understand that the whole function of government is to essentially empower a small group of people, just like the Caesars, and keep them at the top of the food chain and give them a legal infrastructure to extricate resources from you legally, and then provide some sort of balm, if you will, by way of bread and circuses, by being like, oh, we'll give you this for free, and we'll give you that and this and whatever else. And, oh, yeah, no, we're going to put on a fireworks show and be patriotic and all the rest of that stuff. and you'll just put up with it. And it's the frog in the boiling water scenario turned on, and they just start turning up the heat. And instead of it being like 15% of your income on a yearly basis that goes to taxes, now up here in Canada, you're talking 50%. And down in the States, it's pretty steep too. Although your money's worth a lot more, and there are a lot of other reasons why it's not as bad, but it's still bad. I mean, taking anybody's money and claiming that you need this for the basic principle of mutual benefit is fundamentally flawed as an ideology. And of course, why should I care about what happens to other people? If you'd left me alone, I've been perfectly fine and successful on my own. I don't need your help, nor do I have any inclination to help other people unless I know them and I believe that they actually deserve my help. Otherwise, I don't want to put myself at any risk, and I've got my own life to live and my own things to do. So you're on your own, kid. And if everybody had that kind of attitude, although we would still formulate good, strong, and solid societies and things of this nature, those societies would be far more resilient than what you see we have today, which is a fractured society. This is the final stages of these two Roman maxims used to great effect. We are a completely conquered people. We don't even fight back when our countries are being invaded by people from other countries that have no intention whatsoever of integrating into our way of life. They demonize us. They mock us. They attack us. They want to hurt us. And the political class does nothing. Well, what do you call that? Right? Anybody who wants a really good example of that is just like when the illegals were streaming across the border from Mexico into Texas, after a certain amount of time, the governor just put them on a bus and then shipped them 1,000 kilometers up to the border of Canada and New York, basically. Well, why would you do that? Like, they're all hot to trot about, deporting all these people now, which is going to cost Americans money, right? Doesn't matter what you were doing 6 months ago if they're still in the country, instead of you just taking the bus and taking it back down to the Mexican border and dropping them off on the other side and be like, okay, boys, try again tomorrow kind of thing, whatever. But tomorrow we'll be handing out live ammunition, so I don't know if you want to do that, but you get my point. Why drive them 1,000 kilometers from where from where they need to be going, and then claim now all of a sudden, oh yeah, no, we have to get behind President Trump and all the rest of that stuff because Greg Abbott's part of the machine. That's why. And he knew exactly what he was doing. They all do. And maybe he was trying to hurt New York on a certain level, but a certain part of him also was thinking, the more illegals are up in New York and everything like that, the better I look down here in Texas, and I get to hold on to my power. So you can take this idea of divide and rule and essentially bread and circuses and start to just narrow it down to just individual places like cities and even states. Ron DeSantis is another example. When his ego got too big, he literally thought that he could take on Donald Trump. You saw that worked. A little overestimated there. So, and not only that, he destroyed his opportunity of probably being the next president in 2028. Like, talk about all-time political blunders. But I guess whatever, stay in Florida and don't even bother trying to take on JD Vance. Trump will have him so built up before then you'll just lose again. So I guess Florida, he's a Republican version of Jeb Bush, just better spoken, and he's definitely a better like a better leader and all the rest of that stuff. But yeah, that was a major level political misstep that always makes me laugh. But it's true. They'll use whatever methodologies necessary to maintain power, and then all the systems subsequent that go down the food chain to keep you in line work for them. And so when you go into a court situation, you have to be like, first off, these people do not want the status quo changed at all. Point in fact is they will actively work against you if you try to expose the system. And it can go from a slap on the wrist all the way up to getting Clintoned. Right? Allegedly, right? So and then of course the second thing is to tear away the veil from your eyes and be like, notice how much of our society is bred in circuses. And once you start to sort of be like, I think I want to do this for myself rather than take this handout. Like, for example, do you want to get your own, do you want to litigate for yourself, or do you want us to provide a lawyer for you? You were going to think I was going to say, talk about money. There's a prime example. And there it is. Not only did they use divide and conquer, but then they also use that secondary one to essentially isolate you. And then the lawyer sells you out. And then you're like, well, I had my best chance because I had a lawyer. Oh, man, that's got to hurt. Right? So, you know what I'm saying? Bread and circuses is not just about Hollywood and everything else. It's about every freebie. Oh, we're prepared to give you $200 or a stimulus check during the COVID-19 shutdown or something else. Or we're prepared to forgive your student loans or whatever it is. Nothing is free. Nothing. There's always a price. And if you want it to be free, then you have to actually invest the work initially to make an argument as to why these people should be giving it to you in the first place. So there's still work involved. Having said that, imagine if 100 million Americans tomorrow filed a declaration of understanding and a claim of right and said, I don't want to pay taxes anymore. What kind of effect? Which one of these actions, I should say, would be more effective in taming government spending vis-a-vis things like Doge? What's going to be more successful, Doge or 100 million Americans basically asserting their lawful right to not have to pay taxes to the state because they don't have to? And they invoke Article 47 and Article 1.2 along with Article 16. And of course, Article 1.1, which is the right to self-determination. So the right to self-determination, the recognition from the government that there's no obligation being placed upon the individual to contribute financially for the principle of mutual benefit, and that you have the absolute right to keep whatever you make from the sweat of your own brow without actually having to give consideration to give it to someone else, like the government or anyone. Obviously, if you plant a tree and you nurture that tree for years and the tree starts bearing fruit, well, I think it's safe to say that most people would say that that's your fruit. And it's true. And if you're prepared to take it to the extreme and be like, I'll defend my fruit to the death, well, then I guess it's definitely going to be yours until someone tries to take it. And then you're not really talking about constitutional rights anymore, are you? Unless you absolutely slaughter this person and they try to come up to you afterwards and be like, oh, you weren't allowed to do that. Like we do up here in Canada all the time. People break into your house and somebody blams them. And then, of course, they're like, you're not allowed to do that. I'm just like, well, they're not supposed to be breaking into my house. And where's the police? Oh, don't ask questions. You see what I'm saying? Their arguments are ridiculous. They're ridiculous, but people believe them. They believe them because they've been conditioned to believe them. And they've been conditioned to believe them because they have these two strategies in play, and they're constantly employing them. And you're seeing it now. Divide and rule, Canada versus the United States with tariff wars and everything else. You're going to tariff Canada 25%, but only tariff China 10%? What? You're going to tariff Mexico 25%? I mean, listen, you do you and stuff like that. That's fine by me, but that's a little inconsistent. I'm pretty sure that China is a little bit more aggressive towards you than we are. They've certainly stolen a lot more in terms of military technology, in terms of intellectual property, in terms of, personal property and whatnot by just fleecing the internet and people's personal data. That's the only reason they wanted to buy TikTok, is so that they could get in on the action. People aren't using social media like they used to. Twitter is basically a botverse. So is Facebook. These places are kind of dead. People go on there, but there isn't that much interaction. It's just massive bot accounts that just post the same garbage over and over and over again. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's constantly promoted. Can't get away with it. I might see a real person on Twitter like 1 out of every 150 posts. The rest is just BS, naked chicks, math problems. Yeah, I know I'm weird. Craft beer, whatever, cool pictures and stuff, and art, music, if you will. But even a lot of that stuff is curated like you wouldn't believe. Like you won't see, I'm all about guitar and music and stuff and the independent artist and whatnot. I'll never see that stuff. I don't even know how you search for it. You'll just see, oh, look, here's this concert from 50 years ago, which is going to put more money into whatever Universal Music Group's pocket. So let's just promote more of this because, screw the next generation. And that's exactly how they see it. Notice that music has not evolved in probably about 25 years. And the thing is when you actually get looking at the reality of that situation, it's because it's in control. It's being controlled, I should say, by a corporate interest that has every vested sort of desire, if you will, to keep that huge piece of the pie that they controlled traditionally since time immemorial. So don't fall for it anymore. Wake up. Wake up and understand that they've been doing these things. Patsies, that kid that tried to take out Trump, what happened to him? And false flags, what happened in Las Vegas and Lahaina in Hawaii or wherever, small island or whatever it was called. And there's so many more. 9/11, the Oklahoma City situation, and more and more and more and more. Right? The whole situation with the Clinton family, what went on in Mena, Arkansas. There's just like endless situations like that. At some point in time, you have to understand, if you want to seize true freedom and you want to live life on your own terms and just be free of the government tyranny, it'll start with just a little trickle, and then we'll basically start to join together into, a more substantial mass, and then we'll become a fist that that cannot be just swept away. Can't use the old technology and the old methodologies and the old propaganda and the old lies. They don't work anymore because we don't have to actually do anything you say. And at the end of the day, we would turn the tables so far the other way that we would actually get back to the original premise, which was these people merely represent our interests. You are not in charge of us. You're just the voice to express in a more sort of like, constructive way, I guess you could say, the desires and the will of the population for which you represent. It's not your ideas. But notice how far we've drifted even from that. Now we just put whoever's in office and they like, oh, well, this is what I think we should do. Not us collectively sitting down and be like, well, this is what's best for California and all these places, and this is what's best for Texas and all these places, and over here in Florida and whatnot, this little section over here, this is what works for us. It's like this one size fits all garbage, which of course doesn't work. And that's what we have to stop. We have to stop allowing them to use the oldest tricks in the book to bamboozle us into believing that their leadership is essential. It's not. You could be spending that time building up your own life, building up your own wealth, so you could retire at 40 or 50 and live the next 30 or 40 years in relative leisure and luxury, just enjoying yourself and pursuing your muse, which is what life really is. I'll leave it at this. Anyone who thinks that we were designed to be born, be institutionalized, and effectively programmed in a public education system and then work the most productive years of our lives until we're old gray men and basically our bodies are all dead and broken, and then just die a few years later when we can do nothing. That's not life. There has to be a healthy balance of spiritualism, living, and being responsible. And the responsible part is having kids and being part of your community and working. And the living part is indulging your muse and going places and just living your life according to your code. And of course, the other one is it's self-explanatory. We have to, or else we will be destroyed. So don't fall for these tricks anymore. The tariff nonsense and everything else. Hating on the very person that's actually going to stand with you shoulder to shoulder when the hard times really start. Because anybody who's naive enough to believe that Donald Trump would come to your rescue is just that, naive. He'll go down for a photo op. He'll bring awareness to it. But get down to brass tacks and do something about it? It's up to us now. We have to do that. So, I hope this video helps, and we'll see you next week with some more juiciness incorporation. See you in the next one.